Should I learn to knit or crochet? I think this is a pretty common question for people coming to fiber arts for the first time. They both look kind of complicated and weird. And so then the next question is usually, well, which is easiest? So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video today. And to start, I'm actually going to tell you which I think is easiest. And that, in my opinion, is crochet. And let me tell you a couple reasons why I think crochet is a little bit slightly easier than knitting. One is that you only use one hook, whereas knitting needles, you've at least got two, and then if you have to do in the round for small things, you end up with like 4 or 5 needles. And that can be a little bit overwhelming. It's kind of like eating with chopsticks for the first time. You'll get used to it eventually with practice, but it can be a little strange. So just having one stick, basically, that you have to manipulate can be a little bit easier for some people. Another reason is that crochet has only what I call one live hoop, or loop. So whenever you're crocheting, you put it in, you do your crochet, and then there's only ever one loop that can get pulled out. Unlike knitting, where you have a lot of live loops that can come off almost at any time. And if you have hundreds, for something like this where your gauge is a 1, you're gonna have hundreds of stitches and they can easily come off, and that can be, there have been a lot of profanities because of this issue, because things slip off, especially if you're using metal needles or smaller gauges. They're easy to slip off. Something gets pulled. It can be a bit of a nightmare. So you have to be really careful with that. And so I find that if you're a beginner and you want to not have as much frustration, if you've only got one live loop at a time, that makes it a little easier. And then you can really literally set it down at any point, and this probably won't get pulled out. Whereas if you're in the middle of stitches here, and then you've got to set it down because something happens, it doesn't make it like that knitting is awful and horrible. It just means that it's one little thing to consider when deciding whether to knit or crochet. And that's why I think crocheting is slightly easier than knitting. But that being said, let's go back to which should you learn. And it isn't so much about which is easiest to learn. It really should be about what you want to make. So I feel like knitting and crocheting have two different aesthetics. The crocheting I use a lot for these little stuffed animals. Now this is a Edward's Menagerie aardvark that I made. You make him in the round, you do the body, you do the legs, you do the head, you do the ears, and then you sew it all together. And I find that I really like the look of crochet for stuffed animals. And it makes it really easy because then I don't have to seam anything. Crochet just really lends itself well to working in the round. Here's another crochet thing I did in the round. You start with, a few stitches, and then you just keep adding and adding and adding, and you get these nice round pieces. Whereas making a truly round thing knitting is a bit more challenging. I'd also like to say that crochet the fabric ends up being thicker and a little stiffer because of how the loops are being made. A garment made with crochet is just going to have more body to it, as opposed to, especially a very light knit like this just has a really lovely drape, whereas I've never achieved that with crochet. Not that you might not be able to, I haven't really tried, but it's something to consider. That clothes tend to work a little bit better in knitting, and there's other projects, like stuffed animals and bottoms of bags, and something that you might want a little bit more sturdiness into. Your shopping bags, things like that could be really useful in crochet because it is a bit more sturdy. Another thing to consider is if you want to do something like a ferrule sweater like this, you can change colors in crochet. They just don't come out as clean as these do, and it's just a little bit different. And something I did look up on Ravelry for reference, there are over 11,000 crochet sweater patterns, which is a lot. I mean, of course, you can make a ton of sweaters, but there are 120,000 sweater knitting patterns. So that should give you an idea of where people generally, they use knitting for clothing and crochet for other things. Socks, I think, would just be too bulky in a crochet. So they're very popular to knit, but scarves, hats, even gloves, and then home goods, a lovely pillow or a throw rug. Those are all great things to do for crochet. Something, rugs would be awesome because you could do beautiful round ones and they would be sturdier than if you knit them. So think about what you want to do with the yarn and what items that you want to make, and then decide which is going to be the best choice for you to learn. And just know that they're both gonna have learning curves and could take a time to master. So even though maybe crochet is slightly easier to learn, think about what you want to do and where you want to end up in your crafting, with your crafting projects, and go about it that way instead of just what's easiest. So I hope that that was really helpful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions, and happy crafting, knitting or crocheting, whatever you decide to do. I hope that you're enjoying your time. Bye-bye from Wovoki Crafts.